The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask has been an endless font of discussion and critique ever since its release for the Nintendo 64 in the year 2000, and it's certainly not hard to see why. Majora's Mask is a standout entry in the series, marked by bizarre tonal and gameplay shifts from previous titles in the Zelda franchise. The game is full of disturbing concepts, imagery, and ruminations. It has a distinct macabre to it, and a preoccupation with death and apocalypticism. This has manifested itself clearly in internet pop culture, with plenty of theories and stories concocted regarding certain scenes and events in the game world. However, this is not to say that Majora's Mask is overtly dark and adult in its thematic elements. It is still ostensibly a Zelda game, a fairy tale, an adventure. What I aim to try and explore in this video is exactly how this very distinct atmosphere is created within the game. This charming, creepy, and likeable melancholy. This atmosphere of the uncanny, if you will. And that's uncanny with a capital U. So before I begin analysing this game in detail, we must first attempt the impossible task of defining the uncanny. Uncanny as a simple word can be defined pretty easily. Strange and mysterious, especially in an unsettling way. But understanding and defining the concept of uncanny is an entirely different kettle of fish, and to begin, we need to look back to a theory put forward by Sigmund Freud in his 1919 essay, Das Unheimliche. Freud presents us with two words here, Heimlich and Unheimlich, and both words can be translated from German to mean canny and uncanny, as well as homely and unhomely. This dual definition of the word uncanny is in itself an eerie doppelganger, which then fractures further once we understand that one set of definitions is indistinguishable from the other. Freud points out that the definitions of Heimlich include terms such as friendly and comfortable, as well as deceitful and kept from sight. Heimlich and its antonym unheimlich come to mean the same thing. As Freud himself points out, what is Heimlich thus comes to be unheimlich. They perfectly mirror each other. The word Heimlich is not unambiguous, but instead belongs to two sets of ideas which, without being contradictory, are yet very different. Freud's definitions of these words and their inherent duplicity becomes integral to understanding the kind of abyss-like quality of the uncanny. There is a bottomless hole to the concept, filled with a darkness that becomes easy to get lost in. By understanding that the very word we use to describe the uncanny is in itself a double, we understand that everything to come under its broad definition is also double. So now that we have a basic idea of the uncanny as a literary and psychological concept, the next element we have to understand is the doppelganger, which is a term I mentioned earlier. The doppelganger is also a simpler idea that falls under the umbrella of the uncanny. Now, a dictionary definition reveals that a doppelganger is an apparition or double of a living person. This is a plot device that might seem familiar. It can be found in many works of literature, film, and video games. Examples including Edgar Allan Poe's short story William Wilson, Krzysztof Kieslowski's film The Double Life of Veronique, and the Silent Hill series. Understanding both the inherent doubling nature of the uncanny as a concept, as well as the more distinct idea of the doppelganger, allows exploration of Majora's Mask in a whole new light. The final thing I'd like to consider before we truly begin to explore the uncanny of Majora's Mask is its status as a sequel to Ocarina of Time. A lot of the uncanniness in Majora's Mask is contextual, and an understanding and knowledge of Ocarina is mandatory in order to fully experience the game's intended effects. So, with that out of the way, I'd like to begin analysing the game with that knowledge in mind, starting with by far the most effective horror found in Majora's Mask does not come in the form of the moon crashing into Termina, nor in the form of ghosts or mutated mummy men. It appears most apparently in the characters themselves. We've seen a lot of these people before, polygon for polygon in fact. They are models taken directly from Ocarina of Time. Now this is Nintendo's response to the 5-year gap between A Link to the Past and Ocarina. By reusing assets, they were able to develop and finish Majora's Mask within a year, ensuring that fans of the series wouldn't have another 5-year wait on their hands. However, whether purposely or inadvertently, Nintendo succeeded in giving birth to this incredibly unsettling and indeed uncanny experience. As players, we've clearly encountered and grown fond of these characters before. That's Malon, right, from Ocarina? No, that's Romani now. Kotake and Kumo, who act as the boss of the Spirit Temple in Ocarina, are now peaceful potion sellers living in the southern swamp. There are several examples of these reused models as well, not just major characters from Ocarina, but a handful of side and bit characters as well. There are plenty of new models to be found in Majora's Mask, but it is the strangeness of the old ones that stick out. These characters are the textbook definition of doppelgangers. They are entirely familiar, while simultaneously being entirely different. The same people are given new traits, new situations, and in some cases, entirely new names. They are bizarre fragments of their Ocarina selves given new precedence and shape in the land of Termina. This would be less unsettling if we, as players, were not already entirely aware of Majora's nature as a direct follow-up to Ocarina. As the opening text shows us, this is the same Link who journeyed through and saved Hyrule, this time entering Termina in search of a missing friend, who is presumed to be Navi the Fairy. Link has always been a blank slate, literally a link between the player and the game, so it is no surprise that he shows no sign of recognition for these people that he has already met. This succeeds though in instigating the disturbing thought process that Link himself might be one of these doppelgangers. How sure are we as players that we are playing the same Link from Ocarina? Can we trust what the game has implied to us, or are we being somewhat deceived? Indeed, the masks and their respective transformations also play a large role in this theory as well, as we see Link continue to fracture and divide his own person, creating more doppelgangers of himself, and perhaps in effect sinking deeper into the miasmic void of the Uncanny. This distinct change in tone that takes place in between Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask draws a fascinating comparison to another work released around the same time as Majora, David Lynch's 2001 film Mulholland Drive. Detailed, difficult to comprehend, and rich in symbolism, Mulholland Drive is perhaps the ultimate example of uncanny cinema, and Lynch, the ultimate uncanny director. I highly recommend watching the film for yourself and going on to read the countless fantastic analyses and criticisms on the piece. As it stands, I could spend half an hour theorising and explaining the intricacies of Mulholland Drive, but for the sake of brevity and time, I will simply use the skeleton of the film to further some of my points about Majora's Mask. You'll have to bear with me if this sounds slightly ridiculous, but I wish to begin by proposing that Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, as original and sequel, directly mirror the first and second parts of Mulholland Drive, the second part of the film being marked by the disappearance of Rita and the appearance of Diane. Ocarina and the first half of Mulholland Drive are thematically similar in a lot of ways. They almost act as a setup for the strangeness that is to come later on. Both have a slightly more light-hearted quality to them when compared to their second half and sequel. There is a darkness that lurks beneath the surface, but it only ever very occasionally rises to the surface, usually in the form of short vignettes, cutaways, and side dungeons. The true uncanniness manifests itself when Rita opens the blue box, ushering in the second half of the film. I propose that the equivalent to this sequence in Ocarina is the credits rolling. As Diane Selwyn wakes up in bed, Rita's doppelganger, Link's doppelganger begins his journey into the forest. In essence, both characters' journeys mirror each other, and Diane, like Link, encounters people who are similar, yet distinctly different. Both are plunged into a world of doppelgangers. I don't mean to imply for any second that Lynch influenced Zelda or vice versa, but it is nonetheless interesting to compare two mediums that explored some of the same kinds of uncanny around the same time, the turn of the millennia. Indeed, comparisons can even be made between some of Lynch's other work and Majora's Mask. It is almost impossible not to compare the small, strange and lovable cast of characters in Clocktown to the equally charming and equally odd cast of small-town characters in Twin Peaks. However, that's a topic for another time. So, I hope this video has succeeded in illuminating some of the inexplicable strangeness of Majora's Mask. The uncanny as a concept is so vast and dark that no clear assumptions or conclusions can be drawn from it. It is a feeling, not a fact. The best we can do is look towards some of the ways in which the game envelops us in its own particular brand of dread. Time constraints and harsh deadlines can make or break a title, and in this case, they bred brilliance. Nintendo's reuse of assets is something that I, personally, have never seen used to a similar effect in any other game. A world of doppelgangers, perhaps even a doppelganger world, inhabited by strange and endearing fragments of former friends and enemies. Majora's Mask succeeds in plunging into and tackling the abyss of the uncanny. Its similarities to Lynch's Mulholland Drive are proof of its understated artistic brilliance, and the game's ability to stand tall with the kings of the uncanny.
Got me down, and then I started hearing